somehow it would have sounded like a confession of weakness. After all, it wouldn't be the kind of thing a man could carry into battle, would it? First of all, I don't understand why listening to music while you're working is a sign of weakness. Whatever, I think Mike has some issues. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am doing the last book that I read for the 2021 Reindeer Readathon, but I didn't get a chance to kind of work on this review for a while, so it's become my first classic sci-fi review of 2022, and it's the first to use my Classic Sci Fi Bingo, the video that I just posted the other day. So what's the book? It's Journey to the Center by Brian Stableford. It's a beautiful copy. Like, look at this book. It's so nice. Sorry about the glare, but it's a really cool book, and I got it for like $10 at a used bookstore in Toronto, and it's super cool. So the video is going to go like this. I'm going to do my review that has no spoilers. Then I'm going to talk about the fun tech, which also has like no spoilers, not really, just like the technology. So unless like that's really your jam, it's not really a spoiler. Then I'm going to go into my bingo, and that will contain spoilers. So I'm going to give you a timestamp like around here somewhere that'll let you skip to the final results so you don't get any of the spoilers that I'm going to talk about. So instead of doing like a deep dive like I usually do, I'm going to use the bingo as a jumping off point to talk about some things in the novel, like the representation of women, for example, and space soldiers, things like that. So, one more thing. So I actually filmed this a long time ago, like 3 weeks ago, but because of my kid doing online learning, then my family getting COVID, then having to catch up at work, and I have since changed my bingo chart. So the review and text section are from like January 3rd, and the bingo is from like January 20th. So that's why my shirt changed, and probably my voice, because I'm pretty nasally right now because I'm still kind of recovering from COVID. So anyway, here you go. Here's the review. So Journey to the Center is a dry yet engaging story of exploration that focuses less on plot than on alien culture. So yeah, I was totally here for it. As you know, alien cultures is something that I'm super into, given that I'm a xenoanthropologist. So what is this book about? Mike Rousseau is a loner, a scavenger who spends his life going on independent forays into the labyrinth of levels that honeycomb the planet Asgard. There in the cold that approaches absolute zero as one goes deeper, Rousseau and scavengers like him hunt for artifacts of the race that once lived there but now seems to have disappeared. Except for occasional run-ins with the official relic collection agency, which frowns on Rousseau's independence, Rousseau has led a relatively untroubled existence, until he receives an early morning call from the Tetrans, Asgard's ruling authorities. In accordance with local laws, they want him to take responsibility for a fellow human immigrant named Merlin until he can get on his own feet. Since the last thing Rousseau wants is to be stuck with some freeloader, he hands Merlin off to his friend Saul. When Rousseau discovers that this fellow human was over 7 feet tall and that Saul, along with Merlin, has disappeared, he begins to wonder if Merlin is really just another human visiting Asgard. It goes on a lot longer, like way longer than it needs to for a book that's like 200 pages, but basically he gets roped into an expedition to find Merlin. In terms of characters, let's start there. Mike is a bit of a dick. The 1980s had this habit of writing male MCs who were intentionally arrogant. You'd think it was due to the popularity of Han Solo, who, hot but arrogant. But I think it has to do with two things. One, second wave feminism, and two, a break away from older classic sci-fi. So what does feminism have to do with it? The 1980s saw a backlash towards the rise of social equality. So in media, we get a lot of men who were masculine or macho, which means even if they aren't fighters or brutes, they are confident and demanding. The 1980s didn't like sissy boys, basically, and this is reflected in a lot of media. Most of the time, it's not intentional, but it's a trend, and all trends have reasons behind them. So yeah, you watch a 1980s movie or read a book set in the 80s, or written in the 80s, they tend to have male main characters if it's not like a kind of character-driven like story that fall under this kind of archetype. So secondly, in older classic sci-fi, the main characters were pretty similar. It took sci-fi a lot longer to adopt kind of postmodern elements into their writing, so the focus tended to be less on character development than on new worlds. For example, the books Big Planet and Alien Planet by two different writers, their main characters are pretty much the same guys, like two different authors, I think they're written 10 years apart and they're very similar. So classic sci-fi was intended as pulp to be read and discarded, the male equivalent to bodice ripper romance novels. As such, the focus was not to make you care about the characters much and cry at their journey and psychoanalyze them, but to see them as competent and get on with the story. So that's why a lot of the male main characters, especially in 70s and early 80s, classic sci-fi tend to be kind of dicks. Mike is a good example of this because he really is a dick. He's not terrible, but he doesn't have like the sexiness about him that offsets his condescending way of being. He also infodumps a lot, which is maybe where this comes from. Like he Mike explains to everybody he meets. He just goes on these long, rambling explanations. I guess it's more like a character monologue infodump rather than a narrative infodump, and that's kind of a choice on Stableford's part. Did I really mind the infodump? No, not really, actually, because it was a lot of it was about alien cultures, and as I said, as a xenoanthropologist, I'm totally up for that thing. I just wish it didn't come from this guy, because he was, like, kind of annoying. The other characters are pretty flat. Captain Susarma Lear is cool because she's a woman space marine, which you don't see as much in these novels, but she doesn't have a lot of backstory, nor do any of the other characters. We get glimpses of them, but I can't tell you a thing about any of them except for their jobs. Merlin is a bit of an exception, but I can't really talk about him without giving away spoilers, so I'll, and even he's not that, not that in-depth. I did love that there were 2 female characters in this book and neither were love interests. That was different and refreshing, and I very much like that. The plot itself is very thin and not enough time is spent in the ruins. I can wrap up the plot in like 3 sentences, but the story moves fast enough that you're entertained. It's not complicated. The aliens, though, are the coolest part of this story. There's a huge focus in this novel on alien cultures and worlds, so that aspect was quite a treat for me. While it was a little hard to picture some of the aliens, like what they looked like exactly, the ones you get focused on are really, really cool. And it's more about like their culture than about their physical appearance, and I thought that was really neat. Overall, I'd say that it's a bit dry for a novel with very flat characters, but the world building is absolutely fantastic. I do recommend it. Also, I mean, as I said, this cover's gorgeous. I'm never getting rid of this. Even if I hated the book, I would keep it. Just like Bones of Zora. Where's Bones of Zora? Oh, it's up here. Bones of Zora, amazing cover. One of the best covers I've ever seen. But, terrible book. I hated it. I'll never get rid of this cover, though. Anyway, I definitely recommend, though, Journey to the Center, and I thought it was a really good book, and I will definitely read more Brian Stableford in the future. So, is there any cool tech in this novel? Yes, there is. First of all, I just want to say there's a hilarious passage on page 1 that made me laugh because kids today will never know the pain and the horror of having to do this. Oops. Because I did. I grew up with this technology, as I'm pretty sure most of you did, actually. Some people still have these. Perhaps things would have been different if the call had not arrived in the middle of the night. No one is at his best when summoned from sleep at approximately 1287 standard metric. I only have a wall phone, which can't be reached from the bed. To answer it, I have to wriggle out of the bag and stagger across the room. I usually trip over my boots en route, and this is why I habitually answer the phone with a grunt that sounds more like a curse than a greeting. Yeah, so in the future, on a different planet, we still have wall phones. That's great. So, specifically in this book, there's a technology called the Sky Chain. So most bases on the planet of Asgard, I mean, what is this, Marvel, are below the surface, but they have this thing called the Sky Chain, which is like an anchor that people use to shuttle people to and from like the satellite. I'm assuming by satellite he means like a space station, but a satellite is technically anything in orbit, so I'm assuming he means a space station. So people and goods get traveled up and down this Sky Chain. We don't know what it's made of. It's like a weird elevator, I guess. I thought that was really neat, even though it seems highly unnecessary and would require a lot more energy than just a spaceship, but who knows. They also have these cool things called cold suits, which are basically just spacesuits designed for use in extreme cold. I guess we kind of have things like that now, but these are like very specifically for the cold. The Black Galaxy is something that's really cool. It's really long. Do I have it? Did I save it here? It's famous in its own small way. Our galaxy's dark companion, the shadow galaxy that will one day engulf the greater part of our spiral arm. And then he goes on for pages and pages about other stuff. But I thought that was kind of neat that there's like this like weird cloud galaxy just floating around, and it's eventually going to like merge into our galaxy. And like, I thought that was kind of a really neat idea. Another technology he has, someone's like, how can you wander around for 20 days by yourself in the cold? And he says, I didn't tell him that I usually brought an earplug with 300 hours of talk and music in its microtapes, with a blink-controlled on-off switch. Somehow it would have sounded like a confession of weakness. After all, it wouldn't be the kind of thing a man could carry into battle, would it? First of all, I don't understand why listening to music while you're working is a sign of weakness. Whatever, I think Mike has some issues. But, but I just thought it was hilarious that, like, that he's talking basically just about, like, an iPod. Things like, or a Discman or whatever the technology is that isn't just your phone and Spotify. But yeah. There is a cool concept about androids, but it's definitely a spoiler, so I'm not going to get into it. If you want to know what that is, you'll have to read Journey to the Center. But yeah, that's basically all the technology in the book. I hope you find that interesting. And that's the end of kind of my non-spoiler review. I'm going to go through the bingo time. So let's see if Journey to the Center gets a bingo on my scorecard. Here's my scorecard. So you can jump to here to see the full chart if you want to skip the spoilers. So, outdated science. Yes, definitely. The wall phone, as I mentioned in my tech part, definitely counts as outdated science. Spaceship blows up or crashes. No spaceships crash in this. Predicting social changes. Not really, because we're talking more about alien cultures than Earth cultures. So, and we're still, warring with people. So I'd say no. Sexy female scientists? No. Cool aliens? Definitely. So I'm going to talk about the aliens of this book for just a second. So we get two main aliens in the book. The Tetrans are the ones that live on the planet that I'm going to talk about next, or in a little bit. And then there's the other one's called the Spirellans. So he says the Spirellans don't look much like Tetrans. They have blue and pink marbled skin and two very pronounced skull ridges, which make them look rather like lizards with winged helmets, while the Tetrans look more like moon-faced monkeys with skins like waxed black tree bark. But they have similar mouths with flat upper palates and protean tongues. So that's interesting. What's really cool about the Tetrans is that they have names that remind me of the book of memory called Empire. So things like Scarian, or 74 Scarian, 238 Zanata, 69 Aquila, things like that. I thought that was really neat. He actually asked them about the naming convention at one point, and they don't really explain it, which I thought was kind of funny. There's other aliens in the books too. There's a Sleeth, which is light, where he was light and thin, adapted for fast movement in an environment where the gravity was 4/5 what it was on Asgard. In order to get around on Asgard, he needed to wear supportive clothing. He was dressed in what was effectively an artificial exoskeleton. I thought that was really neat, talking about how, the gravity on this planet is different than the one that he grew up on, so he needs help to get around. I thought that was really cool. We often forget about that when we're reading sci-fi, that people that grow up on different planets or species that grow up on different planets will have, a harder time in different gravity. There's another one called the Vormir. The Vormir are a predatory species, irredeemably carnivorous. I'm told they have extremely bad breath. Anyhow, they have the kind of teeth that go with their diet. Gur looked like a cross between a wolf and a crocodile. It wasn't a particularly harmonious combination. His smile wasn't at all attractive. That was funny. And then there's also some other ones. There's a Canithian, which is one of the women in the book. I'll talk about her later. But basically, it's really... the aliens are really interesting in this because there's so many of them. But we really only get a lot of focus on the ones called the Tetran or the Tetrax. So... it's hard to explain in a few sentences, but the first bit of the book deals with the Tetrans justice system, which is basically if you commit a crime, you can be frozen for your sentence or be sold to someone as a slave, basically, to pay off your debt. There's no mention of whether these prisoners have rights, though, or if someone is checking up to make sure that they aren't abusing them or making them do things that are kind of against some kind of hopefully they have a galactic kind of code of human rights. Because that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, what if some old rich dude goes around paying for young female prisoners who can't consent or feel they can't, feel they have to consent to things they don't really want to do because they're indentured servants, basically. It was an interesting concept, and I wish we'd gotten into it a bit more because it was really fascinating, and it's an interesting idea, actually. Not a very practical one, given human nature, I don't think, but very interesting. So, back to the bingo chart. The next one is alien-human romance. No, there is not one, though he does mention that he finds the one alien attractive and that it would be acceptable to screw her, or as he says, not perverted to, because she looks human enough, which I thought was funny given the amount of stuff nowadays with humans and aliens. And I mean, my own book. I'll stop talking about that. Generation ship. No, there's no generational ship in this. Space soldiers. Yes, Susar Malir and her buddies are all space soldiers, so that was really fun. AI or robots. This is a big part of the book, actually. So the Merlin, the guy, or Merlin, whatever his name is, the guy that they're looking for in the underground city, he's actually a robot. He's actually more like he's more like a replicant. So if you know from Blade Runner, basically like a cloned human, kind of like replicants are hard to kind of explain. But anyway, he's kind of like that, but he's been genetically created in order to carry a virus that will, in like a couple generations, spread to the rest of humanity. So I thought that was a really interesting concept. Apparently there's more books to Journey to the Center, so I wonder if that will deal with it more. But I thought that was really fascinating, that these other aliens that we were fighting, that Susarma Lear and her team were fighting before they came to this planet, they had actually like they had this whole plan, and that's a pretty nefarious plan. It's like 2 generations later kind of plan. Okay. So, New Worlds. I talked about the planet already, I'm pretty sure. Cyberpunk. Nope, no cyberpunk. Blatant sexism. No, surprisingly not. Rocket ship. Yay! Forerunner tech. Yes. Definitely, as I just said, inside Asgard, there's all this old technology that has been abandoned by whoever created it. LGBTQ plus rep. Nope, none of that. Portals or black holes. I'm going to say no, even though that black galaxy thing exists, but that's not really a black hole, so, or a portal or anything like that. It's just some cool science thing. So I'm just going to leave that as a no. The microfiche, nope, no microfiche in this. It's a little too late, I think. I think microfiche is more like the 60s and 70s books. The male MC is kind of a dick. Yep, Mike is a bit of a dick. Not the worst person I've ever read about, but yeah, he's definitely up there on the factor. Racial equality. I'm going to say no, because while he doesn't really talk about this, there aren't any people of color in the book. So unless one of the soldiers are, and he just doesn't mention it. So I'm just going to say no. A plasma or other future weapons. There's these fire cutter things, which are basically just like laser guns, that kind of stuff. There's some other guns as well. Post-apocalyptic. No, I would say it's not. I mean, the fact that the Forerunner people, or whoever they were, abandoned their base doesn't necessarily mean that it's post-apocalyptic. Bounty hunters or assassins. Not in the sense that I mean in this. There are guys that come after Mike and the group, but they're not technically like assassins. Galactic War. Yep, it's mentioned in this for sure. Tech similar to today. I mean, if you count his little iPod Discman thing, then yes, but I don't think so, because that thing wasn't very... I don't know. I don't think it helps it get a... bingo, so I'm just going to say no. If it did, I would, tally goes to the winner kind of thing, but it doesn't, so I'm just going to say no. Passes the Bechdel test. Yes, surprisingly it does. Susarma and the synth talk to one another in this book for a couple sentences. I'm going to talk with the ladies for just a second. I was actually really impressed with how women were treated in this novel. There's 2 women in total, but there's also not a lot of men, so it's not like it was like, 2 women and 500 dudes. What's interesting about the novel is that I started off being like, okay, there's either going to be no women in this novel at all, or maybe they're all going to be sex objects, because the first one we meet is Jacinthe, and she comes in and she's sexy, etc. Men are allowed to find women attractive, but I was like, if this is the only woman in it, then I'm like, okay, it's kind of objectifying. But then a couple pages later, we meet Susarma, and Mike never gets with either of these women. Neither of them have any interest in him. And we find out that Jacinthe was sent to Mike as a form of manipulation from her boss. And so it's kind of like poking fun at that whole concept. And the fact that Susarma is the space captain is really cool, of like a bunch of Marines. And she's not hypersexualized at all in the book. I actually retracted my kind of worries or assumptions about the book because of how women were treated. So that's the thing. You can have a sexy femme fatale character. I love sexy femme fatale characters. But you also need characters who do something else as well. And this book does that. So yeah. Both women in this book are competent. They both have their own goals. They both, do things. Susarma rescues Mike at the end. So, yeah, this book is really good, actually, for women. A very good 1980s representation for women. Good for you, book. Good for you. So, quick bonus. Are there reptile aliens in this? I would say yes. Is there a female main character? No. And is there convergent evolution? Yes, he actually talks about it, and in that phrasing on one page. So I was very excited about that. So it doesn't get my quick bonus, but it's does it get a bingo though? Let's see. It actually doesn't. It has a lot of stuff, but it just doesn't get there. It just misses a few things here and there. I mean, the predicting social changes thing. No, because it's not talking about Earth. Too bad, Journey to the Center. Too bad. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. It was really fun. I'm going to continue doing kind of this bingo chart, I think, for all the classic sci-fis that I read, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's a cool kind of jumping off point to discuss some of the things in the book. So So yeah, let me know what you think. Have I missed anything on the bingo chart that you think is important? Because every time I do the bingo chart, I've done it like 4 or 5 different iterations, I think of something else as soon as I publish it, so that I should add. So I can replace a few things, but yeah. Anyway, thanks.